Tonight's program is on water. This is the beginning in the series of water, and it's really about having enough, and if you don't, you're going to be in big trouble in a hurry. This is Water Class 3001. As always, self-reliance is really about making choices, about making these provisions for the future, or you become a victim, and since each one of us has a choice, we simply must choose what it will be. Provident living based on principles is what it's all about, and that truly is the key to self-reliant living. And that's why I take the approach of wanting to teach you why we do what we do, not just here's a list, go get this stuff, and lots of luck. Truth about life as always is, there's no doubt that tomorrow will come, and there's no dispute that things happen. But how you're prepared to meet tomorrow will make all the difference in the world. If you're prepared for the worst, then no matter what happens, it will be an adventure. And true preparedness is really based on principles, not just lists of things, not just stuff to have and store away, put in the basement or in the trunk of your car, because it's what's inside of you that will make all the difference in the world. What you know is more important than what you have. Of the many principles that there are, these are ones I talk about the most, these 8 principles that we build our life around. One of those is the law of provident living, and there are 4 parts of that: order, priority, spiritual attitude, knowledge, and then stuff. The law of stewardship, which simply says you and I are alive, we have the responsibility to act and will be held accountable for how we act. The law of the parachute, simple concept, you better have a parachute before you get thrown out of a plane or you're in big trouble, and it better be a good one. You better know how to use it. It's exactly the same way when we talk about being prepared for any kind of emergent disaster, but now it's attitudes, knowledge, skills, and then the supplies and material things that you have. These 9 core preparedness modules, and each one of them is literally like a parachute. Foundation is principles that we talk about. Then we have clothing, water, sanitation, nutrition, shelter, wellness, tools, and supplies. Now you can learn more about these and other important principles in other classes that are both published, some of them online. Prepared to survive no matter what, and that's about developing you, because that's where survival really comes from. That's a free online presentation at safeharboralliance.com. Just a caveat right now, it's not available at this moment, but with the new website, it will be up very shortly. We'll edit that out of this one when it goes up. I love editing because you can take out reserve. The other way to learn more about these principles is through a DVD that is available through Safe Harbor Alliance. This is the Self-Reliance series, part 1, the foundation, and it's a 2-hour principle-based DVD that's available at low cost online. Now, tonight, in these 9 core preparedness modules, we are talking about water. Well, water, which I call it the liquid of life, and without an adequate supply of clean, safe water, you're going to be in big trouble in a hurry. I think we all know a little bit about thirst, but the bottom line is you don't live very long without water. And if the conditions are really severe, within a few hours you can be in trouble, and certainly within a very few days. The way it is for almost every one of us in this country at this time is you go to the sink, you lift the lever, and water flows. Simple as that. Tap on, water flows, tap on, water flows. And we're kind of used to it. In fact, most people have no appreciation or understanding of how wonderful our supply system is of water. And with this idea that it's just always there, most Americans just have the feeling, well, it's just taken care of. Something goes wrong, you call somebody. They're going to be monitoring the quality, taking care of these problems, pumps, and all of those kinds of things. If you go to my house, and I did this a couple of years back, and I just took pictures of where all of these water taps were in my house, and I have 14 of them. Any one of those 14 will deliver to me clean, safe drinking water. You may have more, you may have less, but it just seems to always be there. Well, where does this class in this concept fit in our overall curriculum that we're teaching? And if you understand that the mission of Safe Harbor really is to reach out and teach as many people as we possibly can in a variety of areas, and of course this one is the vital need and importance of water and being prepared to deal with the issues if some of it should be, just not working. Whole series of classes, if you look at them, there's pages and pages of those. In this water area, this is a class we're talking about right here. There's 9 primary classes. This is the first one in the series. Have enough safe water daily or suffer and die sooner rather than later is the beginning. Then you take a look at the basic water series that will have 4 additional classes that will go into things in greater depth. Now, we're going to be looking at all of the concepts and things that are within them, but since each one of those classes is about 2 hours long, they won't all fit tonight, and then if you drill down underneath them, there are additional classes. So there's a total of almost 20 hours of instruction in this water area. I will do my best to touch on as many things as I can tonight, open your eyes to some of the things perhaps you have thought about. So when you look at this whole series of classes, each one of them fits in there, and there's kind of an order that I would recommend that you'll take them in, and we'll do our best. There are 16 vital water topics that we'll be touching on this evening. And you'll see each one of these come up. In some places, I'll spend more time on them. In fact, tonight, realizing maybe some people will never get any more instruction in water, so I'm going to spend quite a bit of time right on the front end of one of these. And then others, we don't have a lot of time. So understand why water is the liquid of life, or the lack of water. Well, it is part of our critical infrastructure. This infrastructure that delivers so many things to us it's a wonderful lifestyle. I enjoy my lifestyle. 2 of these things that most people will understand or link together is electricity and water. For most people, there's pumps and valves and controls and purification and filtration and all those things that are controlled or regulated by electricity. Another part of that infrastructure that most people don't appreciate is the communication. The vast majority of it is now over the internet that delivers signals to remote locations and hundreds of miles away to signal, bring more water, cut it back, whatever it is, control the pumps and the regulations and everything. So our infrastructure to deliver water is wonderful, but it is actually fairly tenuous, and it's quite easy to interrupt it, and potentially in a major way. One of the failures that could occur is if we have a situation where everybody needs to shelter in place. This could be caused by something like a pandemic or a nuclear event, civil unrest, breakdown, lawlessness, a variety of things that could occur for any number of reasons. Now, this is not about gloom and doom, but this is just realizing we could have an interruption, not just to your household or to one little neighborhood, but it could be fairly widespread depending on what occurred. And the problem is that the infrastructure will begin to fail because of cascading minor problems that occur, because you don't have people out there maintaining things. You don't have the operating personnel to flip the switch, turn the dial, call for more or less of something, order supplies, and then things simply grind to a halt. And it will affect vast numbers of people when that occurs. Why is water so critically important is one of those simple questions. Well, let's go to something very basic and understand what the leading cause of death is on planet Earth. Leading cause of death, what more people will die from each and every day, very simply, is dysentery. Dysentery is uncontrolled diarrhea. And for people that may be at higher risk, old people, people that have weakened immune systems, young children, infants, this can be devastating within just a matter of a few hours, a day and a half or something like that. You can be in trouble if there is not intervention. Where does it come from? It mostly comes from contaminated water. And that's the problem, contaminated water. It's not just about having water, but it's about having safe water, clean. Well, gratefully, in the U.S., we don't have a lot of dysentery. We don't have a lot of experience with it, and that's fortunate. That's a part of the infrastructure that we have and the many systems that work together. But this means that a lot of people will be caught off guard because we don't recognize the potential for the problem, and we're not prepared to deal with it as individual households or small communities. And that can leave a lot of people in very serious trouble quickly should something occur to where you have contaminated water. And I imagine you've heard in the news through the years, periodically there's some community where they have a breakdown in their filtration system. It's usually cryptosporidium is the one that gets in there. Crypto can be very, very devastating, and people die from it. Every couple of years or so, there's a breakdown in spite of all the monitoring. Is dysentery. It's pretty hard. So having an adequate supply of water is absolutely vital for your health and well-being each and every day. And if you run out of water and don't have water, well, it becomes a real problem. Very simply, in terms of water, if you get this wrong, you die. Irrespective of whether it's everybody's involved or it's just you individually. I remember studying a while back when I was down in Arizona a number of years ago, visiting down there, and there was a family that got caught on the desert in the summer, and in their case, they did not have a supply of water. They decided to go out for a little drive. They went down this road, car broke down. It's a very deserted little road, and they decided to walk out of there. There are several things that contributed to it, but the big thing was they didn't have water. They were in the extreme heat. They did not survive 8 hours. So there's any number of ways that water can get you in trouble. You must have enough. It must be clean and safe to drink. Well, water is necessary in 3 vital areas if we want to look at it very simply. The first one is consumption. That's an easy one to recognize. We drink water. We use it in our food production, in our food preparations, in our cooking. We have water that we use in sanitation, and most Americans use vast quantities of water in sanitation for washing and cleaning and laundry and flushing of toilets and those things. And another area is in the area of food production. In this case, we're talking about growing food. Whether it's animal or whether it's plant-based, water is involved. So we have those 3 areas where water is very important. We're going to be focusing primarily in this part of the water series on the consumption aspect of those things. So in the case of water, here's what you must do to be prepared. Number 1, you must store some. You need to know how to find more water when that runs out, and you need to know how to make that water safe so you can consume it. When we take a look at this water preparation, it requires that you have an ample supply of water on hand. And what having a store of water does, it buys you time to solve the bigger long-term issue, which is be absolutely sure, 100% sure, of being able to take contaminated water that you'll find around you and make it safe to drink. We call that potable water. And it's safe for other uses also. Drinking of water, consuming that water is, of course, one place you recognize it has to be safe. But if it has a lot of contaminants or bacteria in it, and you wash your hands in it and then touch your mouth, your nose, your eyes, you get sick from that anyway. So you have to have it safe enough for other uses like sanitation and washing and those. Now, most important points about water storage, and that's where we'll start. In fact, I'm going to spend extra time in this area tonight because that is the first line of defense that you have for being prepared. So I'm going to not just give you highlights, but go into fair depth, spend even more time with more details. So I'll pass over some of them a little quicker than you might like, but we'll have the in-depth class available also. First off, let's understand what the minimum amount of potable water is that you must have in storage. It is 1 gallon per person per day. 1 gallon per person per day. This is for consumption, it's for drinking, and it's for food preparation. Now, sometimes maybe you don't use that much. There's other times you'll need to have more than 1 gallon of water per person per day. That's why on the average we'll say 1 gallon per person per day is what you must have on hand. And it is just for this consumption purpose, not to be used for any other purpose. If you want water for other things, well, you store some more. We'll talk briefly about that. Now, the minimum is for 30 days. In other words, 30 gallons per person. And the question that people will ask is, well, why not the usually recommended? You usually hear about a 2-week supply, around 14 days. That's a great place to start. As a matter of fact, 30 days is a wonderful place to start too. 60 would be better, 90 is better, have a year's supply. But it becomes very difficult to have that in storage simply because of the size and the... So kind of the compromise is to say if you have a minimum of 30 gallons per person for your consumption, you're going to be good for around a month. Why not just 2 weeks? If you'll take a look when something very serious happens, have a major breakdown, major catastrophe, that very often people are in shock. Just literally, I call it the deer in the headlight stare. They're wandering around for 3 or 4 days and sometimes longer, particularly if you've had loss of all possessions, you've had loss of life and you're on your own. Sometimes people are just trying to figure out if they want to live or die. Should they or should they not? How's this going to, am I going to be rescued? And what happens is for the first several days, week and a half, even 2 weeks, people don't really get active in the recovery of life, if you will. And so we want to have enough that when you finally decide, I've got to solve the long term, rescue isn't helping, coming to get me, I'm going to have to take care of these things. What you want to do is know that I've got another 2 weeks supply of water that I can be consuming while I'm solving a major problem. The other thing is that you would have a little extra water for people around you that you may have a stewardship to care for, other family members or friends. We need to encourage them to have water on hand because your 30-day supply of water won't go very long for 50 people. So have more is the bottom line. Now, when it comes to water, you can buy water. You can buy it ready to go. You can just go to the store and pick it up. You can find it in these little boxes like in the upper left. They're kind of pricey. You can get it in gallon jugs, cases of water, prepackaged, ready to go. That's one way of doing it. But when you buy your water, it's extremely important that you not buy it in this kind of jug. You'll very often see that with some of them. That'll be the lower cost gallon jugs of water. Those jugs are not shelf stable for long periods of time. That plastic is designed to break down in bottles, and after about 6 months, those bottles can begin to fail. Is failing, cracking, and leaking, so it's not a good way to buy your water if you're going to store it in its original container. Buy it in the kind of container that's, well, it's like the apple juice comes in. It'll have a triangle 1 and it will say PET or PETE. That will be a much more stable kind of plastic in which to buy. Now, you can prepare and put up your own water if you want. This will allow you to save money if you do it properly. New containers are always best. If you're going to be getting a container, filling it with your own water, new is the best thing to do. And there's a variety of options that you can obtain out there. They may be large tanks like this, a 250-gallon tank. That one is sized so it'll go through a standard doorway. 525-gallon tank, that goes in your garage or in some kind of a building that has a much larger doorway that you put it in and stand it up there. You can buy 55-gallon drums. You can buy these totes. You could put water in. There's 5-gallon cans like this that very often people take on picnics. Those are handy. They do stack. They have a handle, and they're fairly easy to move around. Now, new is best, but if you can't afford that, if you simply say, look, I'm trying to cover, you do have a variety of low-cost options that you could consider using. And we're talking about containers that would already be used. In many cases, they're being thrown away. Again, you'll find totes like this. 55-gallon drums are one of the most common things that you're able to pick up. And then there's a variety of them, and some of these things are just downright free. In that row of them in the back, that blue barrel, that's like, I believe that's a 20-gallon drum. Next to it is 16-gallon. Both of those come out of the food process industry. The tall end, because one of the common places you'll find containers like this that have had food in, well, soda pop isn't food, I shouldn't say that, but they may have had some kind of a food-related product. That black drum had seaweed in it. One of the things you're looking for is they must be food grade. Those 2 cardboard boxes that have bladders in them, those are also out of the soda pop industry. Those are being thrown away. Those 2 5-gallon ones in the front, those had flavors in them, natural lemon and natural almond in one of them, and those were being thrown out because the people that buy the different flavors or syrups or things, they can't recycle them. They could, but it takes so much work and effort to clean them, sanitize them, put them back into service, that throw them away, or they will sell them at very low cost. So that's one source of these that you can come up with, some of them being free. This is another one of these free sources, and my position is you never throw one of these away. If you should buy the soda pop, that's a temperance lecture for you do, or know somebody who does, Those are bottles that you could use. The one with the check mark above it, that is my favorite bottle in terms of its shape. Those are the 2-quart juice bottles. If you're buying apple juice, cranberry juice, and those kinds of things, that is one of the best bottles to use, because being somewhat square, they will nest together better. Of course, they come round also. I don't like to use the dark colored bottles like that one, particularly for drinking water, because I can't see what's in it. And I want to be sure that I can look and see things being clear and clean. Nothing's floating or swimming in it. Now, there shouldn't be when you put up your water properly, but I always want to err on the side of conservative. So I prefer not to have a dark colored bottle. And once again, we're not going to use the milk jug type bottle simply because it does not store very well. One of the problems with those bottles or the milk jugs is that plastic is somewhat gas permeable. And if you were to take those jugs and set them on a basement floor or in a crawl space on the dirt, it'll taste like dirt. It'll taste like basement floor. It'll pick up odors and tastes from its surrounding, whereas these other bottles will not. Use containers. Now, there's some rules about used containers. You need to know what has been in them. Their condition and their soundness. Is it a trustworthy source? Now, if you bought the juice bottle at the store, you brought it home, you used the juice, rinsed, cleaned, and sanitized it, you know the source, you know what was in it, you know it hasn't had some kind of a pesticide or a toxic substance in them. So you have to have a trustworthy source. You want to be sure that you have the plugs and seals and gaskets, and of course we're always looking for food grade. One of the ways to get the food grade is something that was in food service that was labeled as such. What you must do when you get a used container is be sure you wash them. Now, sometimes you'll get containers and they'll say they've been washed. I don't trust what anybody else has done. They may have done an excellent job, they may not have been. So it is with these drums or containers, any one of them, you want to wash out. And one of the things to do with the big drums like this, whether it's a 55 gallon or this 20-gallon type, you want to be sure that you turn it upside down with your sanitizing and both with your soapy solutions in them. Just a very small amount of it. With these free water boxes that you can pick up, when you talk, now these come from like the convenience store, the C-store. The soda pop rack that's in the back, and it pumps the syrup up to the soda fountain where it's mixed in with the carbonated water. When you get friendly with the manager at the store and you tell them you're going to pick them up, be sure you come pick them up. They don't want the trash. They're just going in the trash can. And you want to be friendly with them because they need to save the cap for you. And even if you had to pay them 50 cents for each one of them or $1 for each one of them, it's worth it based on what you would have to pay to get new containers. So get them to save the cap for you. You can pull that bladder out of the inside of that box so that you can see it and wash it and rinse it and clean it. One of the things that you'll have to do is they have an internal check valve that's so that when you disconnect the hose, all the syrup doesn't run out on the floor. It's a very simple thing to remove with a knife like my pocket knife and a pair of long nose pliers, and you can see down inside, you see the valve, and then in the lower right hand picture, I've got down in there with a knife and just cut it's just molded right into it. You just cut those little ears that hold it in there, get your pliers in there and jerk it out, because now I can run water in and out very easily, which is what you want. And then you can clean and sanitize and soak them and get them ready for your storage of water. And I'll go into greater depth in the other class, but it's a free source. One of the things to be sure that you do is on any of these bottles, whether it's a soda pop bottle or the juice bottle, is take that little safety ring off. One of the reasons we want to remove it is that there may have been some juice or syrup that's run down underneath there and you didn't get it cleaned real well, and now you're growing some kind of mold in there. You don't want that. So we're going to remove it as a part of our cleaning so that we can thoroughly wash, rinse them, sanitize them, and any one of these you can sanitize them with a little chlorine wash. nice strong ones so you'll kill anything, and also the chlorine will help remove flavors. One of the other things that will help remove any flavor that's left in some of these soda pops would be using baking soda. That will help to remove some of the taste. What I found is you can never seem to get rid of the root beer taste. Root beer is the most persistent of all of them, so I kind of avoid the root beer ones, unless you want your water to have this faint little root beer taste to it. Now, when you have these bottles, and one of the reasons I really like the 2-liter bottles and the 2-quart bottles is that they nest very nicely inside of a box. In this case, apple boxes. The telescoping box works exceptionally well. When you get the right size box and the bottle, you match them up, those bottles come right to the top of the box. And what that means is you can stack them because the weight of the box is above and the floor of the box is above. It's being carried by all the bottles all the way down. And in a storage room where I have these apple boxes, these are what's called the railroad car box. It's a little bit of a taller box that they fit in. I have them stacked literally to the ceiling full of water in there. They hold up just fine. They can be stacked there for years because it's not just the cardboard that's taking the weight. It's the combined, strength of all of the bottles inside there with the water in them, so it'll carry it stacked right to the ceiling. Now, best water and process to use. And you see, you have to know that when you open one of those bottles and want to use the water, water is safe, it's pure, it is not contaminated. That's why it's extremely important that you wash and sanitize those bottles very well. But you also have to have a good source of water. For most of us, we're going to be using either city tap water, the culinary water, or culinary well. Now, if you're on a well, it's a good idea, and you should do this as a matter of course. Periodically, you test the well to be sure there isn't something with it. But even if you're using tap water or culinary well water that you believe is safe, what I prefer to do is run my water through a filtration system that's going to remove anything from it. It'll take out chlorine, it will take out any of the parasite cysts and large bacteria. Now, viruses, unless you use ones that are like these two on the left, they have an ultraviolet light in them, and that'll zap any virus that makes it through the pores. So I prefer to filter everything and then put it into my bottles. Now, if I have a clean sanitary bottle and I have absolutely sterile water in this case, nothing's ever going to grow in it. However, if you don't have a filtration system and don't take the attitude that says, well, I'm not going to store any water until I can afford to put in one of these units, that's not a good idea. Because one thing for certain is the lack of water can kill you within just a few days. And if you have water that you don't trust or it may have been contaminated, you can process it by some of the other means that we show you because you've got water. You can't render, if you don't have any water, you've got a problem. So store water now, even if you do not have a filtration system, but that's what I prefer to do so that I know my water will be absolutely safe. Now, there's other things that people will do. I don't do this, I prefer not to, and I'll explain, but you could add a little chlorine to the water, something like that. I prefer not to. Talk about containers for just a moment, some more on containers. Glass is outstanding to use. It has one problem, that's primarily breakage. But one thing you may want to consider doing if you're doing canning, and if you're into preparedness, I think you ought to be doing canning, bottled vegetables and things like that. As you empty out a canning jar, you can take that jar, simply fill it up with water. It'd be a good idea to go ahead and process it, put it back on the shelf. Otherwise, you're storing air. Why do you want to store air? You store water instead, and that would be a better use of those jars. But glass is outstanding. Things will not contaminate the water. Stainless steel is wonderful, but you have an availability and cost issue unless you happen to be somebody that was in the, how about in the milking business? And if you have out on the milk barn that you're no longer using your stainless steel tanks, please sanitize them, wash them, and fill them up with good water so that you'll have water for yourself and other people around you. In most cases, the thing that is most practical for us will be plastic, and that's the PET or the PETE bottles that you'll have. You want to avoid using things like a steel or aluminum. So for most of us, we're going to be using the plastic bottles to store things in. Now, that raises a question that some people have, and there's plenty of information possibility of having things leach into the water from the plastic? Well, first off, we have to consider the practical storage versus waiting until everything is perfect. Now, glass and stainless steel, best way to store water. However, since that's not the most practical thing to do for most of us, what can we do to reduce the issue of leaching? Here is my list. First off, we don't want to store our water and our plastic bottles where they're going to be around sunlight or really a source of ultraviolet light. Ultraviolet light breaks down the plastics. We don't want to be storing them in hot places like in your attic or the trunk of your black Chevy in Phoenix. You know, put them in places where they're not going to be very, very hot. We do not want to store RO water, reverse osmosis water, or distilled water. The reason for that is very simple. Distilled water and reverse osmosis water is very close to distilled water. You've taken the minerals out of them. And the water is then very hungry. See, water, we very often call it the universal solvent. It likes to dissolve a lot of things. And since it has the minerals taken from it, it's hungry. And if there are some of these plasticizers that could leach into the water's going to be hungry to pick them up. So what we're going to store is natural, mineral-laden water. I also choose not to add any chemicals to my water, such as chlorine, iodine, GSE, or any of those things, because those are very reactive chemicals, and they may, in fact, increase the leaching, the reactivity with water. Now, you can add them if you had some kind of a concern and you wanted to. You may do that, because here's what I will tell you. You're better off having water with a little bit of plasticizer in it than no water whatsoever. It's going to take you years to develop cancer or some of those kinds of things with a small amount of plasticizers in there, but you'll die in 3 days without water. So if you wish to add those, you may want to do them. However, I choose not to, because if you have sterile water will not spontaneously, spring life in there. You have to put the organisms in there. You have to seed it. You have to add the bacteria, the algae, the fungus, or whatever it is to it, and you have to provide it with food, something for it to eat. If you take bacteria and put it in distilled water, it dies. There's nothing for it to live on if you have just a few bacteria in there. The other thing is, since the chlorine and iodine are very reactive, they may enhance the leaching. So since I have a very stable, secure container, and I put sanitized, clean water that has no bacteria or anything in it, and it also doesn't have any food in it either, there's no sugars or starches or anything, then nothing's going to grow in it, so I'm not concerned about it. I have had water that has been in storage. At one time, I had some water that was 15 years old. It was stored in those plastic 2-liter bottles, and the water was just fine. I've used it, and could just drink it as it was. There was no odor, and I've used quite a few of those bottles of older water when we had a need. On rotating water, well, I don't find it necessary to do that if you have a sound and stable container. You have sanitized that container. You have sanitized water. There's no chemicals. It's not distilled and it's not reverse osmosis water. Why do you need to rotate it? And again, I go back to this idea that I've used water that's been old just fine. And I have other people who have reported the same kind of thing, that they've used water that is quite old without any issues. Now, storing water is more than just having drinking water. There's other vital uses for water you need to be aware of. You must also store additional water for sanitation so that you can wash things. Now, this water doesn't have to be quite as pure. It may not be what we'd call potable water. Potable water is safe to drink without doing anything to that. So, since we're not going to be consuming it and it'll be dedicated to some washing and cleaning, my containers might be a little less than pristine. I may in fact have containers like this that are considered food grade, and they've had non-edible things within them. Now, I don't want a container that ever had any poisons in it, any petroleum distillates, or industrial waste in it, because there'll be enough of those things left in there, it could be a problem. And then another way that you can have some washing water, and this is a very simple concept, and it's free, and I love free, it's one of my favorite things to consider, You know, you have these bottles that have the soap and detergents come in them, whether it's for the laundry or whether it's for the dishes. And what we have a habit of doing is when you've poured out all that you can pour out, don't just, you know, the frugal housewife will put a little water in there, rinse it out, and then put the water into the washer, into the dishes. We don't do that. We just pour out what we'll pour out. There's still a little bit coating the inside of the bottle. Fill it up with water, and what do you have? Well, you have wash water, and it's ready to go. It has the detergents in them. We're never going to be drinking anything that comes in those containers because it's not a safe thing to do. The cost is free. What it takes is a commitment. And then I take and put them in these boxes, as I've done here, just like the drinking water, label them as soapy water. They're ready to go. Now I don't have to consume some of that very precious drinking water when I need to wash something and clean something. Overview of some of the key points on how and where to store water, because one of the issues you have is, okay, I have drums, I have bottles, where the heck am I going to put this stuff? Well, first off, you can hide them all over the place. And if you'll come to our house and take a look under the kitchen cabinets and the bathroom vanities and some of the other cabinets, particularly the lower cabinet, deep, you know, what's in the back of that cabinet? It's some old pot you haven't used. Get the pot out, give it away, and then line the back of your cabinets with bottles of water. They can go under beds, they can go under dressers, they can go behind couches. Now, some people have a lot of room in their house, but what I hear sometimes, I have this little apartment, I live in a trailer, you know, whatever it is, you can find places to hide water if you're committed to doing that. And I recommend that you do it at, you know, just don't not do it. It's so important. Now, when it comes to 55-gallon drums, these are big and they're heavy. They go in the garage, they go in the basement, on the carport, they can go outside. You want to have them covered. They can go in a shed or outbuilding. I have one in the basement, and then the rest of them are in an outbuilding where they're out of the sun and they're out of the elements directly, although in the winter they do get cold and they will in fact freeze. But one of the things you can do with them, particularly if you have a shop, is that you line up some barrels, as I've done here, put a slab of plywood on top, and they make a heck of a table. Of course, if it's in a storage area, you can pile all kinds of things on top of them. So there's places to stick them and hide them in work areas, in shops, in basements, but you need to have the water. Now, one of the things about having water in drums is, well, they're heavy. So what are we going to do about that? Well, first off, let's take a look at the different ways you store water. A 55-gallon drum is going to weigh just a little under 500 pounds. 30 gallons is 270, 5 gallons is 43. 12 2-liter bottles of water in a box weighs just about 60 pounds, and a full 2-liter bottle weighs 4 pounds. So depending on how you store your water, it may be a little more portable than others. If you've got it in drums or barrels, be sure that you have a pump, a siphon hose. You can also have a rack with a spigot. You can have a lay-down drum dolly, some of these kinds of things, so that you can either be stacking them or you'd be able to lay it down to pour water out of it, or that you'd be able to pick it up and move it around if you needed to. In my case, I just say, this is where the drum's going to go. I put it here and I leave it there because it's 500 pounds. I'm not going to be moving it. I'll simply pump the water out of it when I need it. Now, on moving water, one of the advantages of having it in these apple box handles in them, you get your apple box from the grocery store, get from, you know, friendly with the produce manager there and ask him for them. Just be sure you come by and pick them up when he says they're available. You have handles on it. It weighs 58 pounds. And if that's too heavy to move, you can take each one of those bottles out. They weigh just a little bit under 5 pounds each one. Now you can hand them out, pass them out, and move them. You can also do other things. You can make a little carrier like that one to the right there that holds 2-liter bottles in it. So there's a gallon of water with a strap on it. Something that I do is if you take a look at those bottles down below with the wire on them, I can hook a strap to it with using a little bit of baling wire and tie it around the neck of the bottle, put a loop on it, and then, you know, every time you get a piece of luggage, comes with a strap on it. You know, I just don't use the straps. So I never throw them away because there's webbing and straps and buckles and things. Those go in a box. Now that I have a bottle that has again, a sling on it so I can carry it if I want. Here's a water pack that you'll see coming into our system soon. It's designed to carry 5 2-liter bottles or the 2-quart bottles. They sit inside of just little sleeves in there that hold them, so that if you needed to be mobile with water, now you can carry that water on your back, or you could put it on youth and they could take some of this water along with them. Water's heavy though. That's one of the disadvantages of it. Move it. All of the details on what we've been talking about previous to this are in the expanded classes. This class 3101, which is water, the liquid of life, and what you must do about it. And it's everything you've seen here in much greater depth and more details in these things. An overview of the key points, ways to make contaminated water safe to drink. In an emergency, there may in fact be a lot of water around you. In fact, I drive by every day when I come in, or every time I come up to the valley here, as I did today from my home, I pass by these sources of water on my way up. None of those sources of water would be safe to use just as it is, but nonetheless it is water. So having a way to use that water is important. And you have to consider this, that during disasters, all surface water is contaminated. It will be dangerous to consume. There might be some streams and lakes and things right now that are pristine enough that you could consume it safely the way that it is. But when you have a disaster and you have injury and dead and dying things around and people around that water, it will be contaminated. So all the lakes, rivers, ponds, streams, irrigation, even rainfall, depending on what the event may be and what's in the air, may be highly contaminated and is not safe to use as it is. Now, there are 5 basic ways of treating the water to make it safe. We have heat, filtration, chemical absorption, and ultraviolet radiation. And I'm going to tell you that you'd actually like to have the ability to use all. You may find that not one of them, in fact, I will tell you there's no single one of these by itself that will take care of the water, depending on what's in the water. And since you can't tell, you don't have a way of measuring, do I have virus in the water? There aren't any filters that you commonly get that you can guarantee will take viruses, in spite of what manufacturers say. They do not reliably do it all the time. So you're probably going to be using 2 or 3 of these in concert to ensure that your water is safe when you're dealing with highly contaminated emergency. So an overview of using heat to sanitize water. This is the oldest way, and it's actually very simple. Just, you can bring water to a boil. In fact, it doesn't actually have to be a boil. Almost all bacteria, all water-borne bacteria, viruses, when you get it above 100 Fahrenheit, they're going to be dead. Well, bring it to a boil, then you know you've done it, unless you have a way of measuring the temperature. You can put it in a pressure cooker. That will conserve even a little more energy. You can use distillation and the solar ovens to raise the water on the temperature. Here again, we'll cover those in greater depth in the future. The use of chemicals to sanitize water. Chemicals can be very effective. On the left, we have iodine. Iodine will kill most bacteria, all viruses. It is not really good on taking out cryptosporidium or the giardia. The one to the right is a chlorine-based one. This is using chlorine dioxide, but it has a disadvantage. The disadvantage is, as a liquid, it's not shelf-stable. It will be dated. You'll have to watch the date on those things and replace them. In the case of the iodine, such as the Polar Pure, one of its advantages is it can sell for 100 years and it will still work. You do have other chemical options that are available to you that you would be good to learn about. GSE, the little red thing there, this pin, that is a chlorine dioxide generator made by MSR. Using a battery, water, and table salt generates chlorine dioxide. Also, a best way to have a chlorine that will store a long time is using a dry chlorine. That's like that dry tech that you see down there. Excuse me. Been in meetings all day on the phone and in person. Voice is a little ragged. The black granules you see, that is activated carbon. That's a way to remove the chemicals. So if somebody says, I don't want to be drinking chlorine, I don't want to be drinking chlorine, I can take it out very simply with a carbon-based filter. Same thing with GSE that makes the water bitter. It'll kill things in the water, but it makes the water bitter. That'll come out with the activated carbon. We'll show you how to make those kinds of filters. They're very simple, they're very inexpensive. Another method of sanitizing water that will take care of most things will be using ultraviolet radiation. You have two sources of ultraviolet radiation. One of them is man-made, battery-powered or AC-powered ultraviolet lights. But one thing that's extremely important is that water has to be clear. Cloudy water, foggy water, water that has turbidity in it, it's not reliable to do that. The other thing you can use is the sun. You'll see this described sometimes as SODIS, solar disinfecting. The bottle has to be clear, no labels, clear day, and here again, the water must also be clear. But that will work quite effectively as long as you obey the rules with that. These different sanitizing methods are in class 3102, which is sanitizing water using heat, chemical, SODIS, and ultraviolet. They are simple and effective if done correctly. However, you need to know their limits. Are they 100% effective? And the answer is no, they are not 100% effective on everything. That's why having the dual methods of taking care of things is important. Well, one of the things I want to, and I talk about this quite in depth in one of our other classes, is some of these deadly traps that you can get into, and it has to do with the marketing. This is where your education is so critical, because I read marketing literature, I watch videos and all those kinds of things, and I see things being claimed as that, frankly, I know better than that. And so I have a concern about a lot of those things. And this is where your education will be critical, that you can look at something and say, I wonder what the truth is really, and perhaps you can, well, solve the problem is what it comes down to. What's the truth really? Excuse me, I bumped my pointer. You need to understand that there's a big difference between 0.5 micron nominal and 0.2 micron absolute in a filter. Each one of them will do a good job for what it's intended to do. But sometimes the manufacturers will overstate, or the marketers will overstate what you can expect it to do. These other little bottles that you carry water in and you can drink out of them directly. One of the challenges you have with them is you can't get enough water through them. Then you have cross-contamination issues down in the lower left-hand corner on some of these countertop drip filters. There's another bottle over here I'll talk a little bit more about. This one that is beautifully marketed. It's a nice product. It has some great advantages. However, it's over-marketed and oversold. You can watch on the internet this little presentation where this guy, first off, he has a British accent, so that makes him, yes. So you watch him, and they take all this ugly water out of this fish tank that has just junk in it, and they dump in some more things in there. He pours it right in this filter, gives it a little pump up to pressurize it. You watch him squirt out this clean water, and he drinks it. And you can, in doing this in front of a live audience, and everybody, goes ah and cheers and what have you. And then they make the point about how they want to get these all around the world to people, where folks like this little boy in the lower left-hand corner, they're scooping up this dirty, contaminated water. And you can take that dirty, contaminated water and it'll come out clean. Here's the challenge. They will tell you that that bottle is good to filter 6,000 liters of water. It'll do 6,000 liters of water that's clear. You take that water that you had in that fish tank on there, or that stuff that's out of that muddy puddle down there, you won't even be close to that. So you get the impression that these things are magic, and that they will do things that it's like, I just buy one of these bottles, filter anything. It'll filter anything, just not very long. That's one of the biggest problems I see with promotions that are being done out there, is what is the reality of these things. So you have to watch out for those things, and as you become educated in this whole area of how to work, and you learn how to read the specifications and all, you can in fact understand them. One of the vital steps that you have to learn is pre-treatment. This is extremely important, that you learn about the pre-treatment of the water, and this is one of the things that the people that make filters don't tell you about. There are three main ways of pre-treating your water. One is through settling, just let it stand, and a lot of stuff will settle to the bottom. Pre-filtration, And a lot of them have a pre-filter on them, but the problem is these pre-filters are all very, very small. They sometimes call them silt stoppers, and they don't last very long. If you have really ugly water, you're going to plug them in a hurry. Another way of doing this is an advanced way that we'll teach you. I'll show you what flocculation does here in just a moment. But here's the problem. Without pre-treatment, you can have serious problems with any of these five. One of them in particular is about plugged filters. You have plugged filters in a heartbeat with some of this turbid water. Your absorbers that are picking up things like the carbon and others, they will be spent very, very quickly. Or you may have ineffective treatment, such as with chemical or the ultraviolet radiation. When you're ready to do the treatment to the water, it needs to look almost clear is what it comes down to. Pre-treatment of water before any of these five methods. If you take a look on the left over here, you'll see settling. There's water that I scooped up, really dark and muddy, and you see what's settled to the bottom. Down below, there's different ways of filtering. You can buy filter bags and those kinds of things. But what's amazing, you get one of these filter bags that says it's a 1 micron filter bag, and you think, 1 micron, 1/1,000,000th of a meter, that's you'll be surprised how much comes through. In fact, you see in the upper right-hand corner those two jars right there. Every particle that is in that came from that stream or that river is smaller than 1 micron, so most of it came through, leaving that very cloudy-looking water. In fact, here we look at the flocculation. There it is, this very cloudy water that you can't read the label that's behind it. And there it is after the flocculation process to cause this stuff to kind of coagulate and settle to the bottom. Here it is, the water is now clear. That water's not safe to drink. It'll still have bacteria, viruses, and other things in it, but now I can treat it, and I'm not going to plug my filters and or my chemicals are going to be effective by the process that I want to be using. The in-depth on the dangerous marketing traps and then this vital step of pre-treatment that you're not really told about, because everybody wants you to believe that you can just buy their filter, buy their device, throw ugly water in, it comes out clear. And it does. It's just that you're not going to be able to use it for very long. So it's what they don't tell you need to learn about. We talk about 3 key points to selecting filters that literally can save your life. And here again, we don't have time in this overview to talk much about them, but I will tell you this. There are only 2 brands of these in, and some of them even within those brands may be better than others. The only 2 are MSR, Mountain Safety Research. They make a series of products. They've been around good. The other one is Catadyne. Catadyne is Swiss-made, MSR is US-made. Any other brand, I will simply say, well, I wouldn't and I don't, because they have failed tests. In the class when we do that, I'll show you some of the tests that have been used to show you how badly they do others. The countertop drip filters. There are 3 brands that you can use. This is not your ones that you buy down at the, the Walmart or the variety stores. Those are not adequate for an emergency situation. 3 brands: Aqua Rain, which is US, British Berkfield, commonly called the Berkey, that's British, and then you have Catadyne, that's the one on the lower right-hand corner. That again is Swiss-made. They're all good units. They're all very close to equivalent. They have different features, advantages, and disadvantages. I'll teach you about in those classes. There are other emerging technologies that are interesting to follow. I don't recommend them at this point, and one of the reasons is the durability. That Lifesaver bottle that I talked about that puts out this wonderful clear water, it has a durability issue. If you took that bottle and had it sitting on a countertop and dry, you now need to replace the filter. They do not take shock very well. So there are limits to each one of these things. But I know they're working on solving some of those things. They'll probably get better at it. Some of the key points on what filter makers neglect to tell you is something what you need to know. We've kind of talked about that. When we're talking about filters, there are these 3 stages to it in this case. One is the pre-treatment, then the actual filtration, and then post-treatment or post-filtration that you may need to utilize. Because these filters, in spite of the ones that say they have a viral stop or an additive to them, they are not effective for highly contaminated Here we go back again to this highly contaminated water, and the filter makers want you to believe that you can just take and scoop water right out of there, run it into their filter, and it'll come out clear. And the reality is it will come out clear, but you're not going to have very good filter life. And that's one of the things that is high on my list is realistic filter life. Like that one where they say 6,000 liters, they need to you can get 6,000 liters through it. As you start to get any cloudiness or discoloration there in the water, that filter life starts to go down dramatically. The true filter durability, that's one of the things they don't tell you about unless you kind of read in between the lines. On the ones that use the little microfilament fibers in there, it's the same technology that's used in kidney dialysis. It works very well, but it can't take shock. It can't take freezing. The absolute performance on these things in terms of what it will filter, what it will not. You're very often, you read the specifications unless you know how to read the specifications. It all sounds really, really good. The real need for spare parts, boy, that's one, you've got to have lots of spare parts, filters and everything else. And with some of them, the care and maintenance may be fairly difficult. And what are the real world operating parameters you can use these things under? What will affect them? Here again, freezing can be one of those, as well as this, turbid and nasty water. Keeping the sanitary section sanitary. One of the things a lot of people don't understand is that if you just touch the wrong part of this filter with contaminated water, now then you may not have a filter that's been compromised. How to maintain the filters and then when to replace them, cross-contamination, proper assembly, spare parts, again, lubrication, freezing, all of these issues. Very often you're not taught very well about that. In fact, most people use these filters under non-rigorous conditions in the wilderness for streams and everything. They have no problem with them. One of the other things that happens is people use a filter year after year after year and they never change the filter. They don't feel that they have to, and they say, well, I never get sick. The problem is there wasn't much in the water to get you sick. When you're dealing with a disaster like the water that was floating around in the city and after Katrina there in New Orleans, that is really nasty water. We've done some testing with some really nasty water, and that's why it failed. Here's one of them. I won't go into it right now, but here's one of these little bottles that has great specifications and looks really terrific. The yellow that you see indicates the bacteria that grew in this after the water had been filtered. In the picture in the upper left up here, there's the full test protocol with a variety of different filters, and you can see some of them look like they did pretty darn good, and others of them failed terribly. But even though they all have specifications that would make you think they're all wonderful. Spillage, cross-contamination on these countertop drip filters. One of them is excellent in eliminating that. That's the Aquarain. Catadine and British Brookfield have a problem. Maintaining proper wall thickness in these filters. Some manufacturers send you a gauge and so that you can measure the wall thickness. And as long as that gauge in that upper left-hand corner over there, as long as it can't slip over the filter, the wall thickness is still enough that it will be filtering properly. However, I hear some people talk about the fact as long as you haven't rubbed a hole in this thing, you clean them by abrading away some of the surface on there, and some people will say, and some of the instructions say, as long as you don't have a hole in this thing, it's still filtering. Well, it's filtering some things out, but in a rigorous situation it may not. So you need to truth really, and also which spare parts you need to have. And here we go back again to this idea in terms of performance. 0.5 micron nominal is very different than 0.2 micron. Now, the 0.5 micron has its place, and I actually use them as a pre-filter. But 0.2 micron is going to get all the bacteria. However, 0.2 micron doesn't take out any through it. That's where you need this post-treatment. There's bottles like this that we've touched on, and then this little drinking bottle like that. I got one of those because I wanted to see what it did. The specifications are the same as my MSR Waterworks. Waterworks nowadays probably about $180 for it. And, it's $180. You get one of these bottles for $25. Specifications when you read the specs. That sounds pretty good. 25 versus 180, why wouldn't you buy it? So I got one, and I said, everything that I want to consume for 3 days is going to go through the bottle. I had to give up after a day and a half because I was becoming dehydrated. I couldn't get enough water through it. It was good, clean water. I just couldn't get enough to go through it to take care of my needs. There's things like that that you do need to be understanding. These are all covered in Class 3104, which is the selection, use, and care of water filters. And here again, what the manufacturers failed to. Well, making filters using off-the-shelf materials is something you need to know about. You may have water that looks like that. What can you do now that your filters are broken, gone, or you don't have one? Well, there's capillary filtration. You can create your own filter using parts that you can buy right now. That'll save you some money. What do you do when you can't even buy parts? Well, there's some junk and materials around that you may want to store and have available so that you can produce your own filter. We talk about those in depth in Class 3102, making your own drip filters using off-the-shelf materials. So if you can't afford to buy one of these expensive filters, there's some options. You'll still spend some money, but you can save some. Vital water strategies for off-the-grid living. This is where we get a little more serious for the long term. Remember, we need water in these three vital areas for consumption that we've been talking about, sanitation and food production. What we're looking at, of course, has been, safe water for drinking food. How about safe water for animals? How about having safe water for washing and sanitation? How about good water for garden and food production? Because highly contaminated food is not going to be safe to use. Collecting and storing spring runoff. You may want to look at that if you're in an area that no runoff in the spring. How about collecting and storing rainwater that may be available? And then how do you protect this water that you have stored from contamination? Depending on what the event may be, there could be a lot of things that are in the air, in the atmosphere, floating around that you don't want in your water. You need to be considering some of those things. That's Class 3220. Water strategies is what we're talking about. Water strategies for grid down living. And it'll be facing the long-term reality of what it takes to be okay no matter what. An overview of locating and harvesting water that's hidden from sight. Well, there's a lot of sources that you may recognize. Some of them are not quite as easy to use as you might think. Water heaters. Most people's water heaters are lined up and you won't be able to get water out of them. I'll tell you how to do that even if it's up. You have toilet tanks, swimming pools, water beds, hot tubs. Which of those waters can you use for which different use? Some of them are highly contaminated with stabilizers and chemicals. There's others that are just really hidden. You may have a well, such as off to the upper right there. There's a wellhead. There's no electricity to run a pump. How the heck are you going to get water out of that thing? You have stream beds in some areas. You may be able to dig down and get water there. What's the reality about dowsing? You may want to consider an experiment. How about digging a well? Or how about driving or drilling a well by hand? These are things you want to know about and be prepared to do should the need truly arise. So know what water is safe to use without treatment and what is not. Deep wells, artesian wells, flowing springs, all of those right at the output. Know the things that would be dangerous or cause some of these things to be contaminated. We talk about those in Class 3301, locating and harvesting hidden water. Where to look and how to get at it. Now then, the importance of a grid down still, a water still in this case we're talking about. You need to understand why you might want to have one of these, how you're going to operate them, what are energy sources. You want to build your own. They're fairly expensive. You have some options on building your own. 3310 is buying, building, and running grid stills. Most people don't think about having distilled water. A lot of people have distillers, but they run off electricity, and they're real energy hogs. So you won't be able to run them for very long periods of time. You need options for that. Water treatment when society has gone away. What are you going to do there? That's in Class 5, and that's have some plans for worst case scenarios. Well, the first stage for true water preparedness requires two things. First off, to store ample amounts of potable water. Secondly, be capable of making potable water from whatever contaminated sources you may have around you. But total water preparedness requires much more than just those two, and that's where all of these classes are. We've Class 3001, the basic water series. We've touched on the topics from each one of those four. And then as you start looking down below them, there's in-depth classes to help you understand what it really takes. And See, loss of water utility will not be a hazard for you if you have made provisions ahead of time. The first part of that, of course, is having stored water, the ability to purify water, and then what that does is it buys you time to solve the big long-term thing, which may in fact even move to get to where there is water around you. So what next? Well, here's my 21-word lecture on success. You do the best you can with what you have from where you are. You have to do this all in complete integrity. You do it now, and you keep doing it. You keep improving, getting better. So here's an assignment. In the event that some of you do not have 30 gallons per person in the house, and what I find is the most important thing is it's when you haven't started, it's hard to get started. Once you get started, it's far easier to keep going than it is to get started. So here's the assignment. On your way home tonight, wherever you are, or if you're at home watching this, you may be able to take care of this issue in your house. But let's say that you're driving home after watching this, listening to this. Stop by the convenience store, the grocery store, go in there and find a couple of 2-liter bottles of soap, the soda, the cheapest you can find. Get the brand you don't want to drink. Get the stuff on sale. We used to buy them for 69 cents. Longer. Take them home. Please don't drink that stuff. Pour it down the drain. Let it eat out the sludge that's in your drain. It's really good as a drain cleaner. Take and rinse, clean, sanitize, fill them up with water, immediately start tucking them away, because once you've started, it's far easier to keep going. Well, the question is, in terms of water or anything else we talk about, will you live providently? Will you make the provisions? And if you'll do that in all areas of your life, you can face the future with hope. You can be hand-wringing about all the terrible things that might happen, because the truth about life is there's no doubt that tomorrow will come and will happen. People ask me, what do you think is going to happen? I say, I don't know. If you live, it will. If you die tonight, you don't have to worry about what happens tomorrow. If you live to be 312, you're going to pick up something along the way. So things do happen, but it's how you're prepared to meet tomorrow that makes all the difference in the world. And if you're prepared for the worst, and that's why I look at the worst, not because I'm into gloom and doom. I just know if I'm prepared for the worst thing that can happen, then by golly, I'll make it an adventure. And if the worst thing doesn't happen, it's a cakewalk. And I'd rather have a cakewalk or an adventure than a catastrophe. True preparedness is based on principles, not just lists of things, stuff to buy and store. Because what's inside of you, what's in your head, your heart, your commitment, your skills, your ability is far more important than the stuff that you have. By the way, you need stuff too. It makes it a lot easier. But even if you're caught with nothing, you have a better chance of your head. Well, preparedness is a lifestyle. We call it provident. It is about playing with these things, having fun with them, experimenting. And here's one of those experiments that you try. You don't have to go into the wilderness. This is a simple one. Here's my charge to you. When we go back and we take a look at this idea of test and try, have fun, play with it, experiment, experience, this is what I want you to do. And you can plan ahead a little bit on this. Just turn off the water for 24 hours. Okay, start with 12. Turn it off for 12 hours. Just go to the main water valve, shut it off. That'll be illustrative. Now, once you've done it for 12 hours, you need to do it for at least 24. You haven't really done anything till you've had it off for 36 hours, 3 days. Are you prepared to deal with that? Now, what'll happen at the 12-hour, after the 12-hour one, you're going to go like, oh my heck, I wasn't ready to deal with that. So now you get to where you're good for 24, then you need to be good for 36. That will start to teach you, and it's that way with anything. You experiment with these things. It'll be quite a learning experience when you do that. So have fun with these things at home or out in the wilderness or at the picnic or wherever you may be, just enjoying them. Don't go unprepared. As always, the ball is in your court. We will do our very best to provide you with training, information, as well as experiences and the classes, courses. And you know, obviously, that we're here every Wednesday night, either live in person at Cabela's in Lee, Utah, or online Wednesday night. We will be here unless there's some catastrophic thing down. And then each Tuesday night, we are available over the radio. And then Saturdays, most every Saturday, we'll be teaching live classes. Get the newsletter if you're not getting it. Most of you probably are because you're listening. But join us at Safe Harbor Alliance. Now, questions that you may have here from our live audience. Now, okay, you have a filter you've been using for 3 years, the Catadine, which is one of the good brands of them. You take it backpacking, you pump some water through it, you just take it home, you just let it set around.
Yeah.
What you should really do with that is the best thing that you can do with it is take it out and you want to dry those filters. Now, one of the challenges you have is once you have one of these filters that has the carbon in the center that removes taste and those kinds of things, that the carbon, after it's been wet, they will tell you it's really no good after 6 months. And so in reality, you know, you will not necessarily be getting that absorbing. Now, they probably last longer than that is what it comes down to. But once they've been wet, one of the challenges is you have bacteria that may be collecting on the surface, and if they stay wet, they'll just stay there and just grow. So what you want to do with those things is take the filter out, clean the filter like you're supposed to, flush it with water, distilled water, those kinds of things would be fine, or with a little bit of a chlorine wash on the outside, and then dry the filter. So the critters won't grow if they're dry. You can have filters that will start to contaminate the water as they grow things in there. One of the other challenges is if these things grow and multiply, whether it be mold or algae or something, they'll end up, as they multiply, plugging that filter. So since your filter's been working all these years, you know, you probably haven't had to filter out a whole lot of things in there, but it's best to take them out, disassemble them, dry them, clean the surface of the filter, and then set it, use it. You're ready to use it again. I have a question here. Which pocket knife do you recommend, and what would I expect to pay? The pocket knife that I use, the brand that I prefer is Victorinox. It's a Swiss Army knife. You have two Swiss Army knife brands are made in Switzerland. You have Wenger and you have Victorinox. I like the Victorinox better. They're both quality. If I had a Wenger, I wouldn't throw it away to get a Victorinox, but I prefer the Victorinox because some of its features, and in both reviews, in my experience, it might be just slightly better. So I use the Victorinox. The model that I use is the Ranger. They make the little small ones, but one of the reasons I use this one, it's big enough. It's about the size, almost the size of a roll of nickels. A little larger than a roll of dimes, a little larger maybe than a roll of pennies. You can get your hand around it so that when you're trying to carve or cut or do something with it, I've got a good grip on it. But it isn't so big that you have this gigantic wad in your pocket. So it's kind of the balancing of the tools that are on this. With the new website that's coming up and our other features, I will publish an article on this knife that'll tell you what I use it for, because there's some things on here, it's like, okay, it's got a corkscrew. I don't pull any corks out of wine bottles, but the corkscrew is actually very useful for other kinds of things. Victorinox Ranger model is my preferred. You'll see an article on that shortly, and it'll show you the different blades on it. I also carry with me, not on my person all the time, but I also carry one of the multi-tools. I have the Gerber, I've got the Leatherman, and the Swiss tool. I like the Swiss tool, that's my favorite. It's a little larger than the others, and I carry that with me, but it's not on my person most of the time simply because it's too big. Some people carry them all the time. If you like one of those, you can carry that with you. I have the pliers in those things that are in my pocket in my Castaway kit that we'll actually be doing a class on that Castaway kit, everything that's in it. And a couple of hard to find items, I want to have them available that'll have some of the primary tools that are in it. What would you expect to pay for that knife? I've seen it on Amazon under $30. Prices will be changing all the time, but has been available for under 30. The list price on it, well, last time I looked, was about 56. $30 is just a little bit above the wholesale, the normal wholesale. They buy them in large enough quantities, they get the next tier. You'll find them out there, but Amazon was one of the places you can order. Let's see, any other questions anybody has online or here? Yes, flocculate. Well, I'll give you just a brief description of what flocculation is. Flocculation is where you'll add some chemical or some agent to the water, and what it does is the particles that are in there, they're so tiny, they're almost colloidal in nature. They're floating in the water. The water's very cloudy. You can take the water and you can allow it to stand overnight for hours and hours and hours, and the water is still cloudy. The things that will settle out in about 24 hours or so. They settle. Then what a flocculant does is it makes these things clump together, stick together, it gathers them together, so now they're big enough they'll settle. The problem with some of these particles that are small size, half micron in size, smaller than that, they're the size of bacteria, some of them are, the browning motion of the water, just the jiggling of the water molecules will keep them floating, and they also carry a charge on them, so they repel each other, so they keep pushing each other up in water. So a flocculant is a chemical or an additive you put in the water that makes it clump together so it can now settle out, and also it's easier to filter because it's now bigger chunks than those very, very tiny little particulates in there. That's the thing that shocked me when I had one of these 1 micron filters. And I thought, 1 micron, this is great. And I had some of this cloudy water you get in lakes and streams, and I ran it through it and I couldn't tell that it did anything. And that tells me that most of the particles that are in there are smaller than 1 micron. Now your 0.2 micron filter will filter every one of those things out. But you're going to plug that filter in a hurry. A lot of people say, I've got to have some well water. One lady called me and said, I've got a little bit cloudy, and I dump it in my countertop filter in there, and I ran 5-10 gallons through it, and it stopped dripping. It just plugged that thing. I have to keep cleaning it again and again. You wear out your filters, and so you need to have a way of doing this pre-treatment with something that's cheap and expendable before you put it in one of these 0.2 micron filters, because they're kind of pricey. The 0.2 micron filters, like for Catadine, Aquarain, and British Burkeville, I haven't looked at what current prices are, but each one of those filters is probably going to cost you about $35, $40 in that range, and if you need a cheap way of doing it, and flocculation is one of those. Well, I'm not seeing anything else, so it's kind of like they say in the auction house, going once, going twice, going 3 times. I'll see you next Tuesday night on the radio. Have a great evening. I'll see you next week.